So how do we get the ID of the user who created an event so that we can set it here? Well, keep in mind that we're verifying that token in create event. And of course, during that verification process here in the jwt.go file, we are getting hold of those claims. So of the data that's stored in the token, which includes the user ID. So what we can of course do here is bring back that code here where we get hold of the claims. And I still don't care about the email, but I will get hold of the user ID. And now verify token could not just return the error, but instead also the user ID, which should be of type int64. Now we could of course also outsource this into a separate method if you would want a clean separation between verification and data extraction. But here, to keep things a bit simpler, I'll do it in the same function. Now, whenever we get an error, I'll of course return 0 as a value for the user ID, like this. But here at the end, I'll return the actual user ID. And therefore now in the event.go file, where we call verify token, we will now not just get a potential error, but also the ID of the user. And therefore, of course, we can use that down here to store it as a value for a user ID. Now here, user ID actually is expected to be of type int, where I did indeed get int64. And hence, I'll go to my event model here and make sure that user ID is expected to be an int64 type of value as well. Well, and with that, we should be setting the ID of the actual user who created an event. And to see whether that works, I will start by creating another user, which should then have an ID of 2 or anything else that's not 1. And I'll start my server here and then send this request to create that user. And I'll now use this new user to log in with test2 at example.com therefore, so that I get a new token that belongs to this user now, so this token here. And I'll now use this token for creating an event. So here, I'll replace that other token with this token, which is a different one, and I'll name it test event without a number, just like this maybe, and send this request. And now here I got an error. And the error which I got here looks a bit cryptic. That I got some value type that is a float, not an int64. And this is in the end coming from my jwt.go file. And in that file, it's coming from the verify token method. As you can also see here in the error message, it is related to that method. And the problem here is that actually I am storing an int64 value as a value for user ID. But it turns out that the way this claim is stored and then retrieved later, it isn't stored as that value type, but instead as a float 64. That's the actual value type that's used for storing this user ID number. Therefore, that's what we get back here. And hence, what we should do now is convert that to an int64 with help of the built-in conversion function, which thankfully can be used just like that on a float64 value. So that's now the correct way of extracting that data type or that value in the correct way. And therefore you should now restart that server with that change made and then try creating that event again with that same token as before. And if you do that, it should now succeed and you should see a different user ID. Though here I see 0, just as here for the ID of the event itself that was created. So what's the problem here? Why am I seeing 0 for these IDs? Well, let's start with the user ID. The user ID extracted from the claims, so from the data that's in a token, is 0. And it is 0 because it actually turns out to be 0 when we generate the token. You can see that if you simply output the user ID here. You will see that it's 0 whenever you try to log a user in. Now, why is it 0 here? Well, let's take a look at that login handler. There, we are creating that user model, and then we got this user validate credentials method. And it's in this method where I actually update the ID of the user. The problem is that the receiver we have here is not a pointer to a user value, but instead a copy. So what we're updating here is in the end the ID of a copy, not of the actual user which we're using in that login request handler. So we should change this here and expect to get a pointer to user. And that's all we have to do here. But this will make sure that the ID gets updated on the one original user value on which we're operating when we're logging in a user, so that we're still operating on that exact struct that is populated with request data here. That's the first important step. The next important step is to make sure that we also set the correct event ID. And that happens inside the save method on the event model. So in this method here. There, I'm setting the event ID to the ID we got back from inserting the event in the database. But here we have the same problem. We get a copy here, and we instead need a pointer. So that, again, we're working on that one event value in memory here. One and the same value in all the different places of this program. So therefore here, we should get a pointer. And with that, when we call save here, we'll update this event value that, again, was initialized with data from the incoming request. And that should do the trick. If you make those changes, you'll have to log in again, because we changed some logic related to that. So I will do this here. And then you have to grab this token here. And then create another event and use this updated token. And of course, you can submit any data you want then. And now here you will see the valid correct ID, which might be different for you, but it should not be 0 anymore, and the valid user ID, which also may be different, but definitely not 0. And that's there for now how we can use that data that's part of the token to connect an event to a user.